And she looks up at me and asks me if people die. She's 4 years old at the time, and I decided it was time to be honest with her, which, just as a side note, that was a mistake. I should have lied and told her about rainbows and unicorns. And I told her that people did eventually die, and she looks at me with her big brown eyes and just starts to sob. Her little heart was broken. But that incident made me stop and think. We address dying, we talk about it. It's uncomfortable, but it's not a subject that's undiscussed. We make wills, some of us pick out our own caskets and plan our own funerals. We talk about death, we talk about dying. We talk about retirement as well. We probably more so with our investment portfolios and our meetings with financial planners, and we have a countdown calendar on our desk, counting down the days till our work is finished. So we talk about retirement too. But today, Jane and I would like to focus on the time between, the space between when you retire and when you die, because that's not something we really talk about. And I know Jane and I have over 25 years experience rehabbing people from catastrophic illness and injury. I can tell you for sure that it's not something we plan on. We don't plan on the changes that our body makes as we age. And because we don't plan for those changes, some of the catastrophic things that happen that could have been avoided had we been more proactive in our approach. So we're not looking at just aging in place today, but we're looking at aging well in place and making our retirement years truly those golden years. I'm Rachel Blackwood. I'm one of the co-founders of Designing Independence, and you'll be hearing also from Jane Sizemore. I'm gonna let her take it next.
So I'm Jane. I'm the other co-founder of Designing Independence. All right, so we'll get started. Let me figure out how to make my screen so I can see it. Okay. All right, so our why, the reason this is so important for us is that in a study called the Effective Home Modification Interventions of the Participation of Community Dwelling Adults that was done in 2017, noted that 9.4 million community dwelling adults had difficulty completing at least one ADL. And for those of you that don't know, an ADL is an activity of daily living, and that includes things like bathing yourself, dressing yourself, feeding, and grooming. And then also 12 million reported dependent, so meaning they were unable to complete it in at least one ADL or IADL. And IADL stands for Instrumental Activity of Daily Living. And that is more of taking care of your home, taking care of others, managing your medications, and things like that. So, our slide got shifted, but without support of home modifications, those people were requiring increased personal care assistance, or they were having to move into an institution, which then was creating a financial burden on their families, but also on the healthcare system in general. So with this study, they looked at what were the positive outcomes of having home modifications, and they noted that there was improved functional performance, reduced risk of falls, and reduced demands on the caregivers. So in another study, this one was done in 2019, and it's called Housing Design and Community Care Needs of Older Adults and People with Disabilities. They found that with the intervention of home modifications, there was a 46% reduction of the need for in-home care. There was an overall reduced cost of caregiving and the need for constant supervision by family. And therefore, the family could continue to work outside the home and, have an income to help pay for the care that was needed for those individuals. And then lastly, there was another study that looked at client perspectives after having home modification interventions. And these are the 4 categories they looked at: satisfaction, performance, and independence, measured by the FIM, which is a an assessment used to measure independence level with ADLs that we talked about before. So they had increased satisfaction, increased performance, increased independence, and a decreased perception of environmental barriers that were influencing their performance of these activities. So on this next slide, you can see a graph of how these people's perceptions changed over time. So it starts with their baseline, and then post-test 1 was conducted at 3 months after the intervention, and post-test 2 was done 2 years after the intervention. So you can see like the number or letter C, the change in functional independence over time. You know, it did decrease with time after that 2-year span, but for the most part, people noted improvement in all of these with the intervention of home modifications.
So assisted living, as you probably know, costs $5,000 to $6,000 a month at the base. That's your base. You're looking at nursing home costs around $7,000 or more per month. I can tell you, I know that assisted living costs can at least skyrocket to 10 grand a month, maybe even more, depending on what your needs are and what facility you choose. And just a little bit about fall statistics. Every second and older adult falls in the United States. And this is from the CDC. That's about 25% of older adults report a fall. Now, this does not include all the people who don't report a fall, which is, I can tell you, a lot of people. I have had so many people come up to me and say, well, I didn't fall. Okay, I just sort of tripped over my dog and hit my counter and just landed on my couch. But just so you know, the World Health Organization categorizes a fall as inadvertently coming to rest on a lower surface. So that includes your couch. Falls are also the #1 cause of hip fractures. And just anecdotally, as a physical therapist, if you have a hip fracture, and especially if your home's not set up for accessibility, it's really not an easy thing to overcome, not without staying it long-term at a rehab facility. A few years ago, we had 28,000 deaths from falls, almost 3 million emergency department visits, and 850,000 people were hospitalized from a fall. Just think for a moment, if we could prevent some of these falls, not only would it make a huge difference to the person's life and their family's life that was a potential fall, but how we could unburden our healthcare system, which was overburdened before the pandemic happened. Medicare spent $31 billion on falls in 2015. I don't know what the number is this year, but I know it's not that low. I know it has kept rising over time. So we're going to talk a little bit more about fall risk factors and how that applies to home modification. And we're going to talk a lot about building blocks, because a lot of people have some risk factor for falls. Maybe there's a visual issue, maybe they have diabetic neuropathy. There's some risk factors that are built in. But what we want to do is take some of the blocks off the tower, because 1 or 2 blocks, that's a fairly stable tower. But you start getting 6, 8, 10 fall risk factors, and that tower becomes a lot more wobbly.
Right, so these are some of the modifiable risk factors that we were talking about, but the goal is to eliminate some of these. So we've categorized them into 3 different categories: environmental, which includes things in your space, in the space that you live, like clutter, trip hazards, like your rugs, lack of stair railings, lack of grab bars, or decreased lighting, or even the inability to control like a heavy sun glare coming into your space. Some of the biological ones are leg weakness, mobility problems, vision problems, and balance deficits. And then if you go over to behavioral, this includes things like polypharmacy or taking more than 4 medications that could negatively interact with one another. Taking psychoactive medications, so things that might make you drowsy or dizzy, engaging in risky behaviors, as well as inactivity. So looking at this image, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and state anything they see that looks like a risky behavior or a risk factor that you see, go ahead.
Well, she's on a very unstable stool.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Anything else? All right, well, I'll go ahead and point out some of the other ones. So like you said,
vacuum's in the way.
Yep, there's a vacuum cleaner in the middle of the kitchen, which is not a great place to store it. Like Deb said, they're standing on a stool. It also appears that he or she is wearing maybe flip-flops, which is not the most supportive type of shoe. They're wearing a robe that has the long pieces hanging down, which could get caught in something, but also reaching way overhead for something on an upper shelf. So maybe even considering telling this person, you know, let's reorganize the kitchen so that the things that you need to reach more often are in an easy spot to get to, you know, clearing the clutter. There's a rug in the room. So the list goes on. So the main thing, you know, to take away from it is don't engage in the risky behaviors, but also plan ahead and make your space more functional for you.
Okay, so we're going to delve into just a little bit more of the research, because the research really does support home modifications. And the American Journal of Preventive Medicine a couple years ago did all these studies on all these different things that could positively affect or it could decrease your fall risk, that would prevent falls. And the two things they came up with were vitamin D supplementation and home modification, which we're going to get to. But just like a side note here, this is not a rigorous exercise program. This is not eating healthy. This is not stuff that you have to invest a lot of time and effort in. All those things are good things, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do them. You very well should. But if you're not going to do any of those, the top two ways to prevent falls, according to the study, were vitamin D supplementation and home modifications. So with the vitamin D supplementation, you might find this a little bit surprising. But as we've become more and more of an indoor culture, we don't have the levels of vitamin D that we used to have, because vitamin D is in some foods, but mostly we make it when our skin is outdoors and it's absorbing the sunshine. You'll hear some people call it the sunshine vitamin. But how it can affect falls is that vitamin D deficiency can cause brain fog, it can cause muscle weakness, and just generalized fatigue, which can all lead to falls. So in theory, according to the study, taking the vitamin D would help increase your levels so you don't have the muscle weakness and the brain fatigue. But now I wouldn't say go just take vitamin D supplementation, because I don't know what your vitamin D levels are. Maybe yours are fine, but it is something I would discuss further with your doctor. But even more than that, vitamin D is the car that takes the calcium in your diet or supplements to your bones. So it helps deliver calcium to your bones and strengthen your bones. So not only does having adequate vitamin D prevent falls, but also it has a way to safeguard you against fractures when you do fall, because it's helping to make your bones stronger. And the other thing was home modifications, which we will keep talking about as we keep going on. So the 6 steps for fall prevention, according to the National Council on Aging, just think of each of these as a block in your tower. Having a balance and exercise program, talking with a healthcare provider, reviewing your medications, getting your vision and hearing checked, talking to family members, and keeping your home safe. As a physical therapist, I am asked all the time, what is the best exercise? And I always come up with the same answer. It's the exercise that you're actually going to do. I think that my body feels really good when I do yoga. I feel like I'm more flexible, my spine feels stretched out and feels better, but I hate doing yoga. I just don't enjoy it at all. And so anytime I get on a yoga program, it doesn't last very long because I just don't enjoy it. I enjoy going for a jog or for a walk outdoors, riding my bike. I really enjoy being outside for my exercise. And so I know that's something I'm going to stick with, and that's the exercise that I'm going to do.
So another one of the points that was discussed is talking with your healthcare provider. So it's important that all of us have a primary care physician and that we actually see that primary care physician. And then also that person should be kind of your point person that's aware of all the other physicians that you might have. But when you visit this person, you need to express your concerns or your fears of falling with them so that they know how to maybe do their own assessment that they can do there, or have you complete a self risk assessment for your falls risk. But then also they can refer you out to specialists that can help you. And then review your medications. So that primary care physician should know all the medications that you're taking, maybe from your cardiologist or your rheumatologist. So he or she can make sure that none of those medications are going to negatively interact with one another. And as we mentioned before, there are certain classifications of medications that can cause increased drowsiness or dizziness, and all of those things, of course, can lead to increased fall risk. And then also, the most important thing about medications is that you understand how you're supposed to be taking them and that you do, in fact, take them as prescribed. So the correct dosage and at the correct time of the day.
Another easy way to take a block off that fall risk tower is to wear sensible shoes. So not the shoes that are listed. Although I did have a lady in assisted living who had worn heels for so long that it was actually more safe for her to wear heels than it was for her to not wear them. So it does depend a little bit on the person. You can go to running stores and they will fit a shoe for your particular foot. You don't have to be a runner, but they will video you on a treadmill and they will help you decide what your best shoe is. And just like on the picture that we saw, the fall risk, maybe wearing flip-flops might not be your best goal. Maybe you need something more supportive. So really take a look at your shoes and do what your shoes, do they make sense? And then the next thing is talking with your family members. And I think that we should throw in the word honestly here. Talk honestly with your family members about what you want, what you need, what kind of support do you want. Some people don't want to age in place. They like the idea of going to a retirement home. And if that's what you want, just to have a conversation with your family members about it so everyone can be on the same page.
Also, it's important to keep your home safe. So take a look around your home and determine if you have just kind of general needs or if you have very specific needs that need to be, assessed by someone who specializes in that. But some general things to think about as you're aging are, can you have a first floor living space? Do you have steps to get into your home? If so, do those steps have railing on them that you can use to support yourself? Or maybe you need a ramp to get into your home. And then even in your bathroom, is it possible to have a walk-in shower? And then if so, can you put a seat in there or grab bars? Or do you need some grab bars near your toilet to help you get up and down more safely? You know, look at the lighting in your home and make sure you're picking up things like rugs and things like that. So this graphic, it shows how many of the 21.5 million homes with people age 65 and older have accessible features. And I thought it was interesting that 1 in 3 adults age 65 or over have trouble using at least one feature of their home. And it does go through and kind of give different percentages for different areas. But one thing that I found really shocking was that only 16% of those people have an elevated toilet, which as we age, you know, it's harder to get up and down from low surfaces. So I found that one quite interesting. Another point that we like to make is that you want your home to not only be livable for yourself, but also visitable. So, you know, can your parents come over to your house and feel comfortable? Can they use the bathroom? Are they able to get around your home? Because if they're not, they might not feel as welcome or want to come over as often. And even friends. So maybe you're an older individual and you're aging really well, but your friend's having a little bit harder time getting around. So think about ways that you could make your home a little bit more visitable for others to come and see you.
I think the first thing that any of us look at if we're looking at home safety is rugs, because rugs cause slips and trips, especially rugs that aren't somehow anchored to the floor, that have a high pile, that are easier to trip on. So it's a really easy way to just remove some of those rugs so that they're not causing a risk factor. The other thing is pets. I have 2 kittens and a dog, and they are under my feet all the time. They are definitely a fall risk. And not saying you shouldn't have pets, they can add a lot to your quality of life, and especially for seniors who live alone, having the companionship of a pet may be really important to their mental health. But you have to think of that as one of the blocks on your risk factor tower. If you do have pets, then maybe it's more important for you to address home modifications, because you know you already have the one risk factor. And when we say home modifications, that can be a really large host of things. It may be putting in an elevated toilet seat, like Jane was saying, which when we replaced our toilets, we did the elevated seat, because why do you want to sit so far down? I don't know. But just some low or no cost options are allow for natural light. Removing clutter is a big one. If I could just get people to pick up rugs and clutter, then that's a huge help. Keeping cords away from walkways. I know Jane and I have done several assessments where we've moved lamps because the cord was right through the walkway. Again, removing throw rugs. And another thing to think about is your water heater less than 120 degrees, just to avoid scalding. Specifically, if you have some sort of sensation impairment from diabetes or whatever the case may be. And just a little off topic, but not quite, do walkers and canes prevent falls? And I can tell you the research on this is actually pretty inconclusive. We can't say for sure that walkers and canes will prevent falls. If there's a cognitive impairment, that is an issue as well, because people don't remember the canes and walkers. And sometimes with cognitive impairment, it's worthwhile putting rails along your hallway so they have something to hold on to that's always there. But one of the things that this study pointed out was that people generally were using canes or walkers, but didn't use them when they fell. And we see this often, the bathroom's not wide enough for the walker, so they leave it at the door. Or maybe they leave their cane at the front of their closet, but then walk into the closet without it so they can have 2 hands to get their clothes. So an assistive device, a walker or a cane, is not going to help you if you're not using it. And the next thing we find is that people aren't fitted for what they need. They go to the store and they buy something. They borrow Uncle Joe's walker, but Uncle Joe is 6'2" and they're 5'5", you know, and it's not set up for what they need. So really having a physical therapist come in and see what you need according to how you walk, what your gait is, and have them size it correctly can make it a much more useful tool.
So that is the most of the presentation, but we just wanted to let you know some of the other services that we offer. We can do medical equipment assessments like Rachel was just discussing. We can help you with adaptations for energy conservation. We can help with medication adherence strategies. We can do pre and post surgery consultations, aging in place consultations, and then seminars as well. And here is our contact information as far as our website and our credentials. And the website has, you know, our emails and phone numbers as well. And then the last slide is just the references from the studies that I had mentioned earlier.
And we can send you any of these studies if you're interested in reading.
If anybody has any questions, just let us know.
Hey, I have a question. I was wondering if you all have groups that will do them.
Sorry, it broke up at the end. I didn't hear the whole question.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Lisa, you may want
I
to sign
think-
back in.
I think I know what she was going to ask because I have the same question. I think she was
Okay.
going to ask if you have groups that will actually do the modifications. Can you refer to vendors that can then implement your suggestions?
So we do not have anyone specific that we always work with, but we have a list of individuals that are certified to do it.
And I also have another question to follow that up. When you are done with your assessment, do you provide a written report and do you give suggestions for specific equipment or products to utilize?
Yes, so we offer various ways. We give our clients options in terms of, you know, do they just want their entryway assessed? Do they just want their bathroom assessed? Do they want their whole home assessed? And then we give options to either we'll verbally tell them things as we're there going through it, which is obviously a little bit lower cost option. And then we also provide a full written report. And in that case, we can recommend, you know, short-term, low-cost, simple solutions, as well as a longer-term, bigger picture that might mean more renovation or larger cost items. And then depending on the needs of the person, a lot of times we'll prioritize, you know, the most important things if they are limited on how much they're going to spend. We'll say, you know, these are your top 5 things that really need to be addressed.
And I'm sorry, I'm hogging you,
That's
but I have
okay.
another question. Can you also assist with clients that are severely physically impaired and we're looking for solutions in the home to maximize their independence, as well as technological options or solutions for certain issues?
So in terms of physical impairments, so we don't only work with seniors that are aging in place. We're happy to work with people with chronic diseases that, you know, might be progressing over their lifetime, as well as people that have suffered traumatic events that need changes in their home pretty immediately in order to get back home. In terms of technology, we will do some of that. However, we have also worked with people that that's their specialty, and many times we will refer to that person since that's more of their professional experience more than ours.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
In the chat, it says, is this covered by Medicare? And the answer is no, it is not. It is all out of pocket cost. I can't really speak as to why Medicare doesn't cover it. I feel like that would save them a lot of money in the long run. But it is considered preventative in nature. And so it is not covered by Medicare, not at this point anyway.
Are there any other options for paying for it, like for seniors? You know, are there any sources that may provide support if they can't afford some of the modifications that you all recommend?
There are different programs out there, and not all of them are going to apply to each individual. Like there's some programs through the VA. And off the top of my head, I'm kind of blanking on what all the other ones are, but I do have a list of them that I could access if necessary.
And as far as our
Great.
services, we do offer virtual services, which is $50 for the half an hour of a virtual consult. So we can at least give some advice and point people in the right direction if cost is going to be an issue. And we also look at, you know, maybe you don't want to buy an elevated commode, but we can just get you a bedside commode and put over your toilet, and that's $30 off of Amazon versus the $200 or $300 it would be to replace your toilet.
Okay, well, I thought this was awesome. I mean, you guys are very knowledgeable, obviously. Yay. Very well presented, and I'm sure if people have questions, we'll be reaching out. And I just also wanted to let you know that I did record this, so it will be available on our NAIPC Facebook page if you would like to revisit this discussion or share it with anyone else.